Welcome back to Rewind of the Living Dead. I am Frank Sinatra.
And I like playing with my food. I am Patrick Guerra. How are you, Damon?
I am fantastic. I should have gone with Dean Martin. I don't know why I didn't go a little closer to my name.
Yeah, you are Dean Martin. That's true.
We are gonna go with aliases on this show today because we are reviewing the new horror comedy out today called Abigail, and that is, of course, from the team at Radio Silence, which that gets lost in who they are. It's basically a directing team along with a producer named Chad Vassell, I believe is his name, and then a frequent collaborator, as I mentioned, Guy Busick, who's written a part of Scream, Ready or Not, Scream 6, and now, of course, Abigail. They all work together, and their team name is Radio Silence. And now we are going to review their newest film, Abigail.
Abigail released April of 2024, starring, and hold on to your hats, folks, because everyone's in this one, Melissa Barrera as Joey, Dan Stevens as Frank, Alicia Weir, who plays Abigail, William Catlett as Rickles, Catherine Newton as Sammy, Kevin Durant as Peter, the late great Angus Cloud as Dean, and Giancarlo Esposito as Lambert. Damon, you know that's how Giancarlo Esposito wants his name pronounced. I don't know if you ever heard that interview with him.
I did. That's the correct way to pronounce it, but he just went along with everyone who called him Giancarlo Esposito.
Yeah, everybody goes, oh, it's Giancarlo Esposito. He's like, my name is Giancarlo Esposito. I mean, let's get correcto, okay? Gorlami. Like, let's just say the man's name the way he needs us to say it. And he commands my respect, and he has since the early 80s, or since the late 80s, I should say. Damon, we are here at what I think has to be the biggest movie of the first half of the year. Don't you think that Abigail is really just what everybody has been waiting for this half of the year?
So far, before we get started there, how do you pronounce it again? Let me make sure I'm getting it correct.
Giancarlo Esposito.
Si, correcto.
Okay,
thank you, Brad. I appreciate that. Thank you to the great Brad Pitt for making sure that I said that correctly.
I missed the cue, so I had to do it again. I'm sorry. Yeah, I would say so because again, these guys made Scream and Scream 5 and Scream 6. I still hate that it was just called Scream and just called Scream 5.
Scream 5.
Scream 5 and Scream 6, which were both massive successes, and they were supposedly going to come back for Scream 7, or that was the original plan, and then they decided to move on to other projects, including Abigail. And, of course, now we know Scream 7 is under a completely new direction with original screenwriter Kevin Williamson returning to direct the film, with Guy Busick actually as one of the writers on Scream 7 still. And then, of course, Neve Campbell returning as Sidney Prescott, and apparently Courtney Cox coming back as Gail Weathers. But this is the team that revamped and revived it, of course, along with Melissa Barrera. This film, as I said, is very loosely based on the 1938 film Dracula's Daughter, which I'll be completely honest, I've never seen. Can't say that I have any idea about that. When I started doing research, I was like, oh, there's a movie called Dracula's Daughter. I had no idea. The premise of the film I already kind of mentioned in the intro, but just to kind of give it to the audience now, the premise of the film is fairly simple, but also I personally believe pretty creative in terms of how they attack this plot, which is a group of anonymous Reservoir Dog-style criminals are gathered together to kidnap a little girl, and they are brought to a mysterious mansion out in the middle of nowhere where they're going to hold her for 24 hours, and her father is apparently going to pay them $50 million in the ransom. And they all stand to make, at the end of the day, it's going to be about $7 million apiece after, everyone gets their chunk of the dough.
Taxes, etc.
After Daddy Dearest pays up to get his little girl back. It's not until after they get there they realize there's something really odd going on here. First, they realize who this girl's father is, which really sets them on a downward spiral of this was a really bad idea. And then part two, of course, which we see in the trailer, is that Abigail isn't just any little girl. She is a 12-year-old girl who happens to have been lived for hundreds of years, and she is actually a vampire. And that's kind of where we set off in this story.
Yeah, it's so weird to be like, what you see in the trailer is what you get. We're not there into spoilers yet. I think in spoilers we'll only get into certain details that are not in the trailer. But that's the movie you're going to see. If you signed up for a bunch of people trapped in a house with a ballerina vampire, you are going to get that movie. I guarantee it right now. We could basically just move on to spoilers if we wanted to. We want to expand a little bit on it right now. Obviously, You know, Damon, I think what's unique about this movie, and again, the trailer makes this clear, there is almost sort of a heist element to this movie, right? It's this ragtag group of opposites all get together with their specialties to make a big heist. In this case, their heist is Abigail. And yeah, it goes wrong, Damon, because they heisted themselves a ballerina vampire. When this trailer first hit, it was like the whole internet went, "Yay, ballerina vampire!" Help me out here, Damon, because I feel like I was lost. Why is ballerina vampire so exciting to people?
That part I couldn't explain. I think the child vampire is kind of exciting. It's a little different twist on that. You don't typically see the children vampire.
We see them. There's smatterings.
Not
I
generally.
mean, we've been seeing them since we were kids, basically. Lost
but not
Boys and all that.
not generally as the
Near
lead,
Dark.
though. Like you don't, teenagers generally speaking, though, you don't see like child vampires outside of maybe Let the Right One In. That's obviously a child vampire. But yeah,
Fantastic child vampire.
It is. It is. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it was necessarily a ballerina vampire as much as it was a child vampire. I mean, they made a big deal about the whole ballerina vampire in the original trailer. And to be honest, listen, this film, I kind of talked about it in our past episode, talking about the Late Night with the Devil, and I said I love films and TV shows about the making of film and TV shows. You're already getting me in at a higher rate than you might get something else, because I love the behind the scenes, like how the sausage gets made films about the film industry. I just love it. When I knew this was the team at Radio Silence, once again, I was kind of already on board a little bit, because everything I've seen from this team I've enjoyed. I know you were not a big fan of Ready or Not. We've not reviewed that on the show. I adore that movie. That was my first experience with these guys. I had no idea what I was going into. And to be honest, the only person I really knew associated with that film was Samara Weaving. And even then, she wasn't like a really massive star at that point in her career. And I went in and saw Ready or Not, and I was like, wow, this is a really fun, like, enjoyable movie. Like, way more enjoyable than I thought it was going to be. I had no idea what I was walking into, and I really enjoyed it. And then, of course, Scream 5, for the most part, fairly positive review, couple issues, but overall I enjoyed it. And then Scream 6 ended up being a incredible film, ended up being my second favorite horror film of last year. So they already kind of had me a little bit, because these guys have been pretty consistent. Now, the problem with the consistency is that you are consistently not a fan of this genre of film, whereas I have kind of really enjoyed what they've done, where they blend the horror and the comedy. And again, my issue with horror comedy, as I've been very well documented on this show, saying, are the films that are so bad they're funny. I enjoy the Evil Dead series. Let me be clear about that. I don't want our audience to revolt against me and come after me with pitchforks and torches. But a lot of people watch Evil Dead because it's so bad it's good. The effects, the cheesy lines, things like that, and people are like, oh, it's so funny. It wasn't necessarily written as a comedy at the time. Now, Army of Darkness, that was clearly written as more of a comedy. But I don't like the ironically funny horror comedies. Like, it's so cheesy, so bad, It's good. I'm just not a fan of that. But when you go in as a horror comedy and you're setting me up for a horror comedy, like a Ready or Not, or even further down the line with like a Zombieland or a Shaun of the Dead, which are clearly much more comedy than necessarily horror, I'm on board. I can enjoy those. And so I feel like the Ready or Not, or not Ready or Not, the Radio Silence team, they kind of blend it with horror with dashes of humor. It's not full on just a comedy like Shaun of the Dead or Zombieland. There's a real horror element here. And this film is very much that as well. Although I will say I was a little surprised there wasn't more comedy in this movie. I actually thought there would be more jokes and more ha-ha, laugh out loud moments, and there really weren't. I mean, not to say there weren't those moments, there were, but less than what I expected, if I'm being honest.
I think that is ultimately, why so many people rallied around this movie. Not because of the vampire ballerina, which clearly everybody loved. I couldn't stop hearing that particular phrase when the trailer dropped. But I do think what people go is it's Radio Silence, and they're going back to their roots, which is horror comedy. Now, Damon, I actually like horror comedy. And if you're newer to our show, you know me as, Patrick the curmudgeon who hates everything that's fun. That's not really true. I actually love horror comedy. I like certain types of comedy. And if you're an old school member, congratulations for still being here with us, nearly 200 episodes in. But way, way back in the day, we reviewed a movie called Scare Me, directed by the great Josh Rubin. Fantastic director, by the way, and actually a really well-made movie. But it didn't work for me. Why? That's a very funny movie, by the way, but it's a funny movie in a different style. And that style, Damon, is, you already know, self-aware comedy. Comedy that knows it's making jokes at you. It's a different style of comedy that doesn't particularly work for me. I made that clear all the way back then, and I feel like I've made that clear multiple times throughout the history of this podcast. It's like, hey, you know what? It's not that this is bad. It's that it really doesn't work for me. It's just something that doesn't work for me. Ready or Not by Radio Silence. I went and saw it in the movie theater. Very famously, my most memorable thing about Ready or Not was when the credits rolled at the end, I was shocked to see that it was not Margot Robbie. I thought I had never heard of Samara Weaving. I thought that was Margot Robbie the whole time. And then the credits roll up and I go, where the fuck is Margot Robbie's name? And then I looked it up. I was like, Samara Weaving, Hugo Weaving's niece? Oh, that's fucking weird. Anyway, I didn't like Ready or Not because it had self-aware humor. Everybody knew they were making jokes. And just to me, just personally to me, when your characters know they're making jokes at the screen, it's not funny. For me, some people love it. I call it the Comic-Con crowd. Like, you play things like Ready or Not at Comic-Con, it will go over like crazy. There's something about that very self-aware humor that just connects with geek culture. And I'm part of geek culture. You're part of geek culture. You have a website called Nerdcore Movement, Damon. You wear it like a badge of honor, as many do. It really works with that crowd. And I've seen it time and time again at countless film festivals and Comic-Con screenings and stuff like that. This type of humor just works for certain types of people. It doesn't work for me. That said, the Radio Silence guys actually, in my opinion, have a great track record because most of their movies, percentage-wise, are Scream 5 and Scream 6, which I happen to like. I happen to rank very high in the Scream series. I think those are good movies. They work with ensemble casts. They know how to mix them in really well. They actually did a great job with those movies. And it's a shame they're not doing a third one. I'm really bummed out that that's not happening, but it's not. So coming into Abigail, I was, I guess, slightly a little bit more optimistic. They had already cut their teeth on the Scream movies. And I was like, okay, yeah, those were nothing like Ready or Not. They had their own, they had very much, well, they're in the voice of Scream is what they are. I go, so, you know, this could be different. Damon, it was different. It was not quite the same kind of humor from Ready or Not. It's not that dissimilar, but the humor's just a little bit more reactionary. They're reacting to the environment they're in rather than trying to be snarky and be funny. A couple of characters are that way, and those characters, if you would be shocked, Damon, some characters didn't work for me. Others did. So the grand twist here, Damon, is that while movies like this typically aren't my wheelhouse, the one thing I really liked about Abigail was the comedy. Because the comedy was much more reactionary. They were just reacting like you and me would if we were trapped in a house with a fucking vampire. You know, and you know, you had enough in you to make some quips while you're at it, you know, but the quips were reactionary. They weren't sarcastic. They weren't, you know, they were just genuinely like, oh shit, there's a fucking vampire on my ass. And I was like, kind of funny, not bad. Like I will tell you that for me, the humor, most of the humor in Abigail works.
So I am surprised to hear you say that because I kind of we knew this was coming. This is such a huge film. This is gonna be a big horror film, and I was like, this is gonna be a really funny review because I know going in this is just not Patrick's bag. Like I just knew it, and I knew going in they kind of had me already. Although I will say, and it's like the other surprise to this. When we get into spoilers, I'll tell you the reason why this movie lost me a little bit in the end. I still enjoyed it, to be fair. I still enjoyed the majority of the film, but there's one aspect that I didn't like, but I can't really talk about it yet. Has to be in spoilers, and I'm sorry I can't really talk about it. But trust me, and for the audience, it's like, dude, there's something you don't like. We want to know if we're going to go see this. I promise you I can't tell you this because it would just totally ruin the movie for you, so I can't. That being said, I do appreciate that you were into the humor. It's kind of funny because I understand what you mean about self-aware humor. I do. And I get what you're saying about that. And it doesn't bother me nearly as much as it bothers you, but I will say, typically speaking, I prefer the reactionary humor as well because I consider myself a reactionary, like a funny guy when we're doing reality. Like, you go back and listen to our Descent episode when I talk about why I wouldn't survive that horror film. And I talked about my big ass wouldn't fit through the tiny little holes and everything. Like that ended up being a really popular clip. That was just me riffing on the show. I didn't write that up. I didn't have like a skit written up about how I wanted to do that. I just had like an idea in mind of like this is what's going to happen. I'm a reactionary guy. Like when I'm with my friends, when I'm with people in a room and we're sitting around bullshitting and joking and whatever, and I can make people laugh. I can make people laugh, but it's never intentional. Like I say things off the cuff. I made a really off-color remark tonight at the movies about the Amy Winehouse biopic coming out. I'm not going to repeat it here because it was really bad. But in that moment, and my girlfriend cracked up laughing because it was so bad. But it was just a reaction to watching the trailer.
Right.
I didn't pre-write it. Like I could never be a stand-up comedian because that's all self-aware humor. You're writing skits, you're writing jokes to tell people to laugh. I could never do that. I don't have that in me. I am not that guy. So I appreciate that you mentioned this is more reactionary comedy versus the self-aware comedy because I agree that's what this is. And for the most part, I would say it works pretty well. And again, but even then, as I mentioned earlier, while this is a horror comedy, I would argue this film leans more into horror than the comedy this time. There are some comedic moments, don't get me wrong, and there are some like even a couple eye-rolling comedic moments where I'm kind of like it's a little cheesy.
Oh yeah, I had those too.
But I would say compared to Ready or Not, that was really a horror comedy. Like there was a lot, like every family member in Ready or Not was goofy and very comedic in what they were doing.
Yeah.
This one's not. Like there are definitely funny moments, but when you start getting the backstory of these characters, understanding who they are and why they're here and what they're doing, there actually isn't a lot of comedy in that. I'm kind of like, this is a little more serious. Like I was actually kind of surprised because 35 minutes into the movie, when you finally get to the point of where Abigail is discovered, and again, that's in the trailer, so I'm not, all I'm doing is telling you there's a setup, which of course there is. By the time you get there, I was like, this isn't nearly the movie I thought it was going to be in that regard. I thought it was going to be goofy and quippy and, and not saying I wouldn't have liked that. I'm just saying I thought it was going to be goofy and quippy and these guys were, I mean, when you watch, listen, to be fair, like Reservoir Dogs, I'm a huge Quentin Tarantino fan. When you watch Reservoir Dogs, like it's a funny movie. Like it is a very funny movie when they're sitting around the table talking before they go do the heist. And even when they're in the building after the heist, and, when Mr. Blonde and Mr. White are interacting and they're pretty much fighting with each other, there's still some really funny lines in there. And it's, Tarantino has that kind of humor in him. This one didn't really do that. This was a little more serious. Like in those moments, like you kind of realize like why these people are here and who they are. And I was like, damn, this is almost like more of a serious heist movie than it was a horror comedy at the beginning. Then again, it shifts gears and definitely does get funny. But yeah, I would say that like comparing this to other films, obviously you get the heist element in there, a little bit of that, I mean, very minimal, like, the greatest heist movie of all time, of course, is Heat. If you say something else, you're lying. It's the Heat is the greatest heist movie of all time. If you disagree with me, just go away because it's not. Heat is the greatest heist movie of all time. Thief is a really good one, but I think the best comparison for a horror film, and I hope you've seen this one, Patrick, is a little movie by the great Wes Craven called The People Under the Stairs.
I haven't seen The People Under the Stairs.
Oh, Patrick, what are you doing?
I have not.
It's a movie about this house in a neighborhood, in a bad neighborhood, that these people are extremely wealthy, and some local criminals decide they're going to break in and rob them. And it's Ving Rhames is in it, by the way, one of his early roles. And his partner, and they have a little kid named Fool, who is like their, he's a kid, but he's like the part of the crew. And they break in this house, and when they break in, they realize this is a house of horrors. It's almost like breaking into the Devil's Rejects house, except they're incredibly wealthy. And that's where shit goes wrong in that story. And then basically at that point you're dealing with Fool trying to escape these fucking insane lunatic people in this house for the next 90 minutes, more or less. That is to me the best comparison because this is what they're doing. They're in a house, they're trapped in a house with a creature, with a vampire in Abigail, and they have no way to escape. What started out as a heist, what started out as like ransom for $50 million, turns into a survival situation where they're basically battling for their lives. And so I think for me, People Under the Stairs is the best comparison because that's kind of what that movie is in a way.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and I think with Abigail, and I know most people who are going to see Abigail are seeing it because they wanted to see the trailer. I'll say it again. You're going to get what you paid for. What the trailer presents is what the movie is. Don't get it twisted. And there isn't really even a twist. We'll probably get more into that in a little bit here. That's the movie you're going to get. But what you also get, now you have to consider, is a big studio movie. You are going to get very high production value, despite the fact that it is a contained horror for the most part. It just takes place in one giant mansion. But you are going to get a contained horror that is very high in production value. And Damon, very, very, very gory, very bloody movie. Without spoiling anything, even the trailer, I think, shows you that there's going to a lot of blood will be spilled in this.
Yeah, that to me, one thing I give, again, even if you don't like Ready or Not, and credit also for the Scream films, Scream 5 and Scream 6, they really do go high on the blood content in those films. Like we actually talked about that in Scream 6. Like we said, that was probably the goriest of all the Scream films by a wide margin. They did a lot of blood and a lot of gore in that movie, which was not really a staple of the Scream franchise. I mean, yes, of course, I know Casey Becker in the opening with her being gutted, but typically speaking, it was, there's blood, but there wasn't like, it wasn't, carnage candy is what Randy calls it in Scream 2, I believe is when he uses that. It wasn't that, and they kind of brought it in for Scream 5 and Scream 6, and Ready or Not, again, even if you don't love the movie, it's a very bloody movie. This one is also, it is a very gory, very bloody movie, and almost to the point where you're going like, damn, like I can't believe they actually went that far in an R-rated, what's going to be seen as more of a mainstream horror film. Generally speaking, they tone that stuff down a little bit. Like they don't go that far in these kind of horror comedies. They go pretty far with that. And it is a major production, so you do get good, you get good production value, which is great. And also, listen, I know we say this all the time, but it's true. When you can cast really good actors in your horror film, you do have a leg up on the competition. Now, I will say, when you do a film like Terrifier 2 and you have no budget and you're just casting actors who you can get in the movie, you do find a diamond in the rough. You find a Lauren Lavera who ends up being really, really good. At the time, no one really knew who she was. Now we all know Lauren Lavera, and I'm excited to see whatever she does. And I think to a different extent, we talked about that even with Halloween, when we all just absolutely praised left, right, and center Scout Taylor Compton, who had the most difficult job in the world stepping into Jamie Lee Curtis's role as Laurie Strode, and she killed it in that movie. And you and I absolutely loved Rob Zombie's Halloween, and particularly Scout Taylor Compton's performance, which was nuanced and different from Jamie Lee Curtis. She made it her own role, and she did a fantastic job at that. But typically speaking, going back to my original point, when you can cast well-known good actors in your movie, you're a leg up on the competition. Now, if you combine that with a good script, good direction, again, that's the marquee of what a good movie is. We had this problem with Lisa Frankenstein, which was another Catherine Newton movie. She's also, of course, in Abigail. There's a lot of well-known actors in that. Carla Gugino, good actors, but the movie was just terrible. And I know people listen to this podcast, so we love Lisa Frankenstein. That was a weirdly popular movie. I thought it was awful.
I don't think that was one of our better moments, Damon. We just were not fans of that movie.
We were not. But again, when you can cast Catherine Newton, Giancarlo Esposito, you can cast Melissa Barrera, you can cast Dan Stevens, you can cast I'm trying to remember who else. Who am I forgetting here? Actually, one of my all-time favorite character actors. Oh God, why am I forgetting his name? Kevin Durand. And of course, the late great Angus Cloud, who of course played Fezco in Euphoria. This was his final film role as Dean in this movie before he sadly passed away. Kevin Durand, by the way, I've interviewed him before. I did a lot of coverage on the show The Strain that was on FX, the vampire show.
I watched The Strain.
Interviewed him a couple times. Incredibly nice guy. Very fun actor. I've been a big fan of Kevin Durand for a lot of years. Did Lost back in the day. He's done a million. You know him. Like he is the that guy of this movie. You're like, I know him. Where do I know him from? He's in everything.
He's in everything.
But when you can cast that kind of a those leads in your movie, again, you're already a step or two ahead of your competition because they did an incredible job here. And I think Melissa Barrera in particular, not to get into best performance, which we'll do in a little bit, they've almost made like her their new Samara Weaving. Like, she was their star in Ready or Not. Now after doing 2 Scream films, they're like, Melissa Barrera is it. And she's fantastic. And she's a really, really good actor. So that in and of itself sets them up for success on a different level than, let's just say, a B movie with similar storylines or circumstances. So this film is set up for success in a lot of ways, right? Now, the flip side of that is if you have all those bits and pieces, you have all those puzzle pieces, and you fuck it up and it's not good, you get Lisa Frankenstein, which is a movie that had all the right pieces, including Diablo Cody, who's an incredible writer. And then for us personally, not to just keep crapping on that movie, that's where it backfires when you have all the pieces and it just doesn't work. So I think again, it's a dangerous precedent because if it works, great, you did a good job. You're already a leg up on the competition. If it fails, then you really messed up because you had a great cast, you had a great director, you had all these different pieces, and it didn't work. Now, again, for me, largely Abigail works because the concept is different. It's not something I've really seen before where you combine a heist film with a vampire, because I love vampire films, by the way. I'm a big vampire film. We've done several on here. I mean, you and I filleted Lost Boys for 2.5 hours.
I continue to fillet it to this day. It's just, I set it down while we're on the podcast, and then as soon as we're done, it goes back in my mouth.
Yeah, I have a giant Lost Boys poster to my left here in my office. I liked the first couple seasons of True Blood. It went completely off the rails later on, but I love True Blood. I loved The Strain. That was another one of my favorite shows. I love vampire movies. The problem with vampire movies is at some point you start losing the ability to be original because there's only so many different directions. When you start trying to go too far, you come up with fucking Twilight is what you do, okay? Vampires don't walk around in the daylight and they don't fucking sparkle, all right? So that's where you go too far.
They do now.
But so that's where, so the concept of Abigail, just based on what is out there in the information, I think that in and of itself was set up for something unique and different, which I enjoyed because this is not a film I've seen before.
Yeah, I do have to give it credit there. Now, this is a movie that largely did not work for me. There's plenty of things that did work, but there's things that did not. But can I pretend like it was unoriginal? No, it was original. It's definitely something I hadn't seen before, and that's why I think I leaned in. I go, where is this exactly going to go? We're going to talk about that more in spoilers. But ultimately, this idea of sort of a heist, I was like, I'm really watching a heist movie for the most part here. And I know we're going to get to the vampire stuff. That's obviously coming. But it was very much sort of like a whodunit, a paranoia, a thriller comedy. It was a lot of things, and that's okay. And I actually like the mixing of genres, and I support that as much as it can. As much as it can hold itself. Can it hold all of those things in one frame? Largely, I think Abigail does it, but we'll get into why I don't think it does it well.
So before we get to spoilers and categories, I want to mention the one huge issue I had with this film, and it's not even really about the film. It's about the trailers. You and I have talked about this, and I don't want to don't want to beat on a dead horse because people listen to the show like, oh, here he goes again. Jesus Christ, we're going to talk about the trailers. You and I have said many, many times in the show that we hate trailers to give away too much. One thing I've adored about films like Cuckoo, which also stars Dan Stevens, coming out later this year, and Longlegs, which is Micah Monroe and Nicolas Cage. I am so in for that movie, and I have no fucking idea what it's about. That's my point. When you give so much away in the trailer that I feel like I've already seen the movie, that's a problem. And the Abigail trailers, the trailers were good, like produced well. It's not that. But the revelation that it was a vampire, and then they do a whole, I mean, literally a minute in the trailer, you learn that she's a vampire, and then you spend the next minute in the trailer of them being like, how do you kill a vampire? We're fighting vampires. And I'm like, you just gave me the whole movie. And largely, to be fair, and as you said, if you're going to the movie to see a heist movie and it's a little girl who's a vampire, you're getting what you paid for. They're not fooling you. Like, we talked about Imaginary, which did not do well. But we said that, like, they should have posited that, they should have posed that film as a gateway horror film for, like, kids and, like, teenagers, not
little kids.
As like not like a hardcore Blumhouse horror film, because it certainly wasn't that. They blew it in so many ways, the trailers and the how they built how they advertised that movie. This one, you are going to get what you pay for. You are going to get a heist movie about a group of criminals who kidnapped the wrong freaking little girl. You're getting that. The problem is I didn't need that. Now, I know there's going to be part of our audience that says, I needed to know that this was a vampire movie. Okay, I get it. I understand that. But that moment in the trailer when Abigail says, Joey, I'm sorry what's going to happen to you. And you just get that sense of dread, which you are the master of dread, Patrick.
Here I am.
Tell me it wouldn't have been better if they just said, and then you hear screams and you see bodies flying and you see blood and you see a guy getting pulled down a hole, whatever. Just you see things happening to them, but you don't see what's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Would that have not been a more effective trailer than the big revelation of just like, oh, she's a vampire? Because I read a review tonight after seeing the film. I don't read reviews for films till after I see it because it gives away, reviews even give away too much. Yeah. There was one review, and I can't remember which one it was. It was either the Hollywood Reporter or Variety, one of the trades. And they said you spend the first 35 minutes with this team, getting to know them, and then the big revelation is Abigail is actually a vampire. And they actually, in the review, had my complaint, which is, we already knew it was a vampire. Why'd you take 35 minutes to get there? Like, why didn't you just bring her out 20 minutes in? Because we already knew going in, like, this is where you're getting to. You took too much time to get to the actual vampire. We already knew it was a vampire. And I was like, yeah, I kind of agree with you, because even though I liked the build up to that, wouldn't it have been so much more effective if you spend that first 35 minutes and you realize something's not quite right here, something's a little off about this situation, and the big reveal is she's a vampire. Doing the trailer kind of ruined it for me.
Damon 100% should have stopped at, I'm very sorry what's going to happen to you. Then highlight Abigail, right? Maybe like a little dance, a little pirouette or something in Abigail. Okay. And then all the trailers could have done that. Blood, guts, throw this, swing that, shoot the gun, blah, blah, blah. There's all that stuff happens. You're right. But I would like to do my rebuttal, or not my rebuttal, but my pile on, my dog pile, if you shall. Insider spoilers, because it's integral to why I don't like this movie. So, right, Damon, would you like to bring us into spoilers?
Yeah, so with that being said, if you haven't seen Abigail, it is in theaters right now. As we always say, whether we love or hate a film, highly recommend going to see it in the theater. Supporting horror in theaters means we're going to continue to get more horror films in theaters. We were just doing a look ahead for May and June going into next month. We're like, wow, there's a lot of horror films going in theaters, because horror films have been doing really well in theaters. So I don't think I need to tell anyone to go support Abigail. It's probably going to do very, very well regardless of what I say. But go support it and enjoy it in theaters. But for now, we are getting into spoilers. So if you haven't seen Abigail, be forewarned. We are now full-on spoilers. Patrick, please go ahead and tell me what it was about the trailers leading into this movie that ruined it for you.
Oh, Damon. So on the subject of trailers, I think I introduced that idea to you way back when you were like, I love trailers. And I was like, I hate them. And you're like, what? You're like, I think every few months you would go, what do you mean you hate that? They give everything away. There is nary a more egregious trailer grouping that gives away a movie like Abigail. And it's so interesting you say 35 minutes. I clocked it. 1 hour is when she turns into a vampire. This movie at the 1 hour mark, not the 35-minute mark, at the 1 hour mark is when she turns into a vampire. Because I kept checking my fucking watch, Damon. Because I'm sitting there watching this heist build up. And I've got it in my notes and I'm going, well, this is really interesting that we're doing all this build up. Like, typically, even when trailers give stuff away, what they're really giving away is the first act, typically. And then they go, we'll save everything else for the movie when people sit down, but we're pretty much going to give you the whole first act in the trailers. That's usually what they do. And I still don't like that. So I'm watching the Abigail trailers, and I've seen Dan Stevens covered in blood, too much blood, where I go, he's probably dead. I see Catherine Newton covered in blood. I see Angus Cloud dead. R.I.P. It's kind of weird to talk about that because he has passed, sadly. I saw all these things in the trailers, I go, okay, Catherine Newton's dead. Angus Cloud dies. Dan Stevens looks like he's pretty damn dead, and we're almost 100% sure Melissa Barrera is going to make it out of this movie. That was the only thing I was holding on hope for. I was like, maybe she'll die. That'll be the craziest thing that'll happen in this movie because we know she's the star. We know she leads the movie. 1 hour into this movie until Abigail turns. So I don't know where that the reviewer got 35 minutes from because I was clocking it from when the movie started.
He probably just made a number up saying like it took a really long time to get there, which it does. It takes a really long. I didn't clock it either. I'm with you. It just took a really long time.
I was clocking it. Yeah, because I'm going. When are we going to get to the part that I know is coming?
Yeah,
because we all know it's coming. I'm sitting in a room full of people who know what's coming because the trailers showed us so clearly, Damon, that we were going to be dealing with a bunch of people running around with their fucking heads cut off, being chased by a ballerina vampire. We knew this was coming. So why did it take an hour to come? And then here's the fucking crazy part, Damon. Okay? Like I said before, most trailers give away the first act of the movie. This trailer doesn't give away the first act of the movie because the first act of the movie just establishes all the characters for a long time and builds up the tension to what we know is coming. Nobody's surprised about what's coming as an audience member. So then it finally comes. And then it basically is the trailer for the next 45 minutes. At the final 15 minutes, you get into the twist of the biggest twist of the movie is that Abigail can indeed spread her power to another person while she is in hiding because the sun starts shining and she can't just go running around the house. They figured out a way to get the sun going. But even in the trailer, Damon, there is a shot of Catherine Newton clearly as a vampire, clearly dancing. They even gave a smidge of that away. So the minute it started happening, I already knew what was going on. And here's another thing, and I'd like to posit this to you, Damon, because I'm sure this is probably part of what you had a problem with. I don't know, I'm just guessing. But there was not a surprise in this movie. You saw everything that was going to happen coming a mile away. Every twist, every turn, every this, every that. At one point during the 1 hour buildup to what we all know is coming, they go, "Oh shit, we kidnapped the daughter of Lazar, this crime boss. Oh my God." And Catherine Newton, who's Lazar? Lazar is, and then they begin to explain it to you. They stand around talking for a while, which you and I know I love when they just talk for a long time and explain things to you. It's so obvious that Lazar's deadly henchman, who goes by the name of Valdez is a vicious killer who has been known in the past, Sammy, if you're not paying attention, Catherine Newton, Valdez is Lazar's hitman, and he's known to rip bodies to shreds and all that stuff. So he's probably in this house too. I'm sitting there going, what the fuck? We all, this whole audience knows why we're here. Why are you doing this to us for an hour? And then, so we know that Valdez is indeed Abigail, that we know that's coming, and it comes. They didn't surprise me. I was like, let me give them a chance to surprise me. They're going to surprise me, and Valdez will show up. And I'll be, oh, fuck, I didn't see that coming. And then I would have been blown away. I'd be like, wow, I thought it was Abigail. Turns out it was Valdez. Or maybe Giancarlo Esposito, excuse me. Maybe he's Valdez, or maybe he's Lazar. And turned out he wasn't either one of those things, and that was fine. He was the other little twist. It's sort of inconsequential to the plot. But I was just like, what the fuck? You really made me wait an hour to get to the movie I already knew was coming. And then when you got there, you didn't surprise me at all. You actually just gave me the exact movie I thought I was going to get, with the little twist of that Abigail could control somebody if she bit them. But they showed that in the trailer too, so it wasn't that big a surprise. It just wasn't explained to you in the trailer, but it wasn't like a shock. So I'm just going like, what did I just do for 2 hours?
So for all that I loved about it, let's put it this way. If I didn't know anything about this movie and I just walked in and watched Abigail,
I'd have liked it very much.
I would have enjoyed this movie. The reason why I'm still sticking with I enjoyed this movie is because ultimately I did still enjoy this movie. It was still an enjoyable night at the movie. I still had fun watching it. But my problem is your problem. Is that we knew you fucked it up. You messed it up by giving us, again, all you had to do was make a trailer that says, I'm sorry what's about to happen to you, in a very dreadful, nefarious way of like, uh-oh, we kidnapped the wrong kid. And then we just see the mayhem and the blood and the guts and blah, blah, blah. We don't have any idea. And then when you go in the theater and you realize that Abigail is actually a vampire, it would drop you on your ass because you're like, oh, shit, I didn't see that coming. Had no idea. Now, to be fair, I haven't seen interviews. I've read a couple interviews with the directors and, talk about the film. At no point did I ever hear them really talk about the trailer. And my curiosity is, because ultimately this is a film being funded by a major studio. My curiosity is if this was a studio decision to put it out there and not necessarily, because when you go back and watch the Ready or Not trailers, you get a hint of kind of what it's about, but it's not. They don't blow the movie for you. Like you have no idea.
No. Yeah, the twist was surprising.
Yeah. This one, as you said, what you see in the trailer is exactly what's in the movie. Now, to a certain extent, you're like, okay, well, you didn't try to mess with me and say it's a vampire and it's actually a werewolf or some dumb shit like that. Like, you didn't do. All you had to do is just something bad's going to happen. I'm sorry what's about to happen to you. Blood, guts, people screaming, running, blah, blah, blah. Cut, Abigail. I'm intrigued. I'm in. I'm way interested in what in the hell is going on in this house. I know the basics. Heist, kidnapping. They're the ones in danger. Why they're in danger. That's all. I don't need to know why. You've got me. You've got me on the hook. Mm-hmm. My guess is, and I don't know this for a fact. My guess is this was a studio decision. We got to tell people it's a vampire movie. To that studio executive, or again, to be fair, if it's the directors, that was possibly the dumbest decision you could have made for this movie. Because, so I knew it was a long time. I didn't realize it was an hour. Holy shit, didn't realize that long. But it took so long to get to her being the vampire. Now, when the big reveal happens and the mayhem that is created when Abigail is finally unleashed is a blast. It is fun to watch this little 12-year-old girl just, there's a great moment, now that we're in spoilers, I can talk about this, there's a great moment where they're like, we got to kill this vampire. Like, we're going to arm up with garlic, which one of the funnier moments of the movie is when they're like, okay, you go get the garlic, and Sammy, being Catherine Newton, comes like a bag of onions, and Dan Stevens goes, those are fucking onions. It's just, she's like, I don't know what garlic looks like. I'm like, that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
But they all arm up with wooden stakes, and they're all going to kill Abigail. And you're like, here we go. It's a battle. There's no battle. She's 12 years old, but she's hundreds of years old. And she's fucking powerful. She kicks the shit out of all of them in like 2 seconds flat. Just beats their asses. And I love that because they're like, oh, she's a little girl, so they can overpower. No. She beats the shit out of all of them. She stabs Dan Stevens in the leg. She beats the shit out of, I mean, it's great. Once that big reveal is done, it's a blast. And then it's basically turns into the film you thought you were going to see, which is all these kidnappers trying to get the fuck away from this childlike vampire. But it took so long to get there, knowing where we were going. I mean, That would be like I'm about to ruin Heat for you, Patrick. It's a movie released in 1995, so I'm sorry. That would be like knowing going in that when Neil and his crew go into that second bank, that the cops are already set up outside waiting for him. Could you imagine if you go into Heat and you already know that you're going to get that big giant set piece in LA with the fire, with the battle between the robbers and the cops, which of course is like the most famous scene in Heat. But imagine if that was already in the trailer. You're just waiting for it to happen. Like, oh yeah, the cops spring a trap to catch the robbers. You can't do that. You're just setting. So yes, you're probably surprised I'm agreeing with you, but that is the biggest problem because you told us it's a vampire up front. You shouldn't have done that. And then you take an hour to get to the vampire. Once the vampire's out there, it's a blast. The movie's a blast. Let me be clear about that. Fun movie. Does not disappoint. The movie does not disappoint for the premise they gave you. But I didn't need to know it. I did not need to know that. Could you imagine? I know this is an impossible question to answer, Patrick, because you've just seen this. But you are a writer, deep down inside you are a director, you have to be imaginative. Could you imagine how much more you would have enjoyed this movie if you had no idea who Abigail was beyond the idea that she's obviously created, she's connected to something nefarious, something evil, something bad. Maybe it's her dad, maybe we don't know anything. Just know that's bad. When she has that great creepy line of, "I'm sorry what's about to happen to you." If that's all you knew, and you sat down and watched Abigail, whatever, last night, 2 nights ago, whatever it was, how much more do you think you would have? I know it's an impossible question, but how much more do you think you would have enjoyed?
It's not. I would have loved it. I would have loved it because I would have been surprised at every turn. Every new step would have been an interesting twist. If I knew, I know for the first whole hour where none of what's in the trailer is going on, except for people trying to guess what's about to go on. And I have all this superior position from months and months of trailers that tell you everything that's going to happen. And these characters are just going, I don't know what's going to happen. And we're all going, we all know. Can we get to it already? I would have enjoyed it much more if it had stopped right there. Now, you talked about studios. Anders Holm, who's one of the 3 guys from Workaholics, he's been embedded in Hollywood for a while now, and he talked about that on his podcast. He goes, the studios want you to literally just give away the movie. They insist on it. They're like, just put the part in where it says what's going to happen in the movie, and you're like, that's going to fuck the whole movie up. It's a very studio thing to do. They do it all the time, and by the way, it works out just fine. General audiences don't really give a shit. Some of our listeners are going to be like, I don't care. I don't care that I knew what was coming. I liked it. It was fine. Okay, great. But I and you, we watch hundreds of movies a year. You need to surprise us. Even when it's entertaining, even when it's got high production value, even when it's got great actors, which it has all these things. Abigail has all of it. But I knew everything that was happening for not just the hour, but then that 30 minutes right after it. So the first 90 minutes of this movie, I know everything that's going on. Everything. I know everything. They lay a couple of pieces down, which is who's Lazar? Will Lazar show up? And he eventually does. And it's just Abigail's dad, which I kind of saw that coming too, because there's this point where Melissa Barrera is standing by a statue of a little girl and a tall man. I wonder who those could be. Who could that be, Damon? There is a possibility that Radio Silence said, no, like we're going to lean into the vampire thing in the trailers. We think it's going to be cool. People are going to love that. It's possible that they could have done that. They may have pitched to the studio, and maybe here's how I might have pitched it to the studio. I go, hey, let's do the trailers this way. Let's cut it off at where she says, I'm very sorry what's going to happen to you. And then they talk about a little bit about Lazar and a little bit about Valdez and a little bit about the most deadly guys in all of organized crime. Well, that is what exactly most trailers give away is your first act, which is what this movie does. And you've been like, oh, wow, they're trapped in here with the daughter of this fucking villainous, maybe perhaps even monstrous bad guy. What could he be? We don't know. If you're making me believe during the trailers that I'm about to see Lazar and Valdez fuck shit up because you kidnapped this little girl and she knows what's coming. And then all of a sudden what's coming is she's a fucking vampire. To be like, whoa, cool twist. Didn't see that coming. Whoa, new twist. She can control other vampires. Whoa, new twist. Uh, Lambert, Giancarlo Esposito's character, he's trying to double cross her. Cool twist. Interesting twist. And he tries to bring on Frank, Dan Stevens' character, to help him double twist. Okay, but then they fight back, and Abigail helps out Melissa Barrera's character. Okay, twist, twist, twist. Cool. But most of the movie was coming. I even knew that Dan Stevens' character was going to turn. It was in the fucking trailer. So it didn't leave me any chance to be surprised. None. So it sucked all the joy out of what is a well-made movie. I'm not going to pretend like it's not. Didn't suck. It's just I knew everything that was coming. And if you know, and I could not avoid this trailer for the love of me, Damon. It's the most played trailer for the last 6 months. I haven't been able to avoid it. So that's the experience I get. And it bums me out because I go, you're right, Damon. They could have done that. You know the movie Predator, the all-time classic, Arnold Schwarzenegger Predator. The trailers only posit it as Arnold Schwarzenegger in the jungle, big guns. Sign me up. I love Commando, I love the Terminator. Cool. Like we all love Arnold Schwarzenegger, great action hero. The people in 1980 whatever went to the movie theaters not knowing that the Predator was an interdimension or intergalactic space hunter. They had no idea that was coming. So they sit down in the movie theater, and for the first act of that movie, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Carl Weathers, Jesse Ventura, John Amos, and a couple other guys, they're out there with guns fighting some guys they can't see in the jungle. And then out of nowhere, the tracker's like, we're not alone here. And then they see all of a sudden they see this weird shape, and the people in the audiences were going, what? What is that? And then it's this invisible force is like chopping all these guys down. And then Arnold is last left fighting this invisible force. And then he reveals it. It's a fucking alien. Dude, everybody's wig flipped. Everybody's fucking top blew. Because you gotta obscure some of that storyline instead of giving us all of it. I'm willing to bet that the filmmakers were disappointed in how much the trailer gave away. But I mean, they know the whole story. They know everything. They did it. They spent 2 years working on it. So they're like, shit, our trailer's really telling everybody everything. But the stats show that no one's really going to care. Well, guess what, Damon? At least one person cared.
At least two people cared. And that, again, that's my biggest. So the difference between you and I with this one is while that also bugged the living hell out of me, and I would say, when I say it ruined it, like, I'm just like, it just was so unnecessary. That being said, I still really did enjoy the movie because it was what the trailer said it was going to be. And I guess I would say arguably my biggest problem, which is what I teased earlier when I said I couldn't talk about it, my biggest problem with this film, amongst very few, overall, I really did enjoy this movie. And I think that it's pretty safe to say when Radio Silence puts out a film, I'm probably going to like it. They've been pretty consistent with their movies. I've not like, Scream 6 was my second favorite horror film of last year. I really enjoyed Scream 5. That didn't make my top 5, but it was near there. I loved Ready or Not. That was before we did the podcast together. We'll eventually review that on here, and I'm sure you'll talk about why you don't like that movie, and I'll talk about why I did like that movie, but I really enjoyed that. So overall, these guys are batting pretty close to 100%. So overall, I still really did like Abigail. It was exactly what the trailers told me it was going to be. It did. And again, my problem is it didn't need to be there. But here's my biggest problem. I wonder, towards the end of the movie, there's a couple of twists. You mentioned Giancarlo Esposito's character. You find out he's actually a vampire who was turned by Abigail a couple years ago. And she's more or less turned him into her puppet to basically lure in all the people who have betrayed or wronged her father, who is Christophe Lazar, this mega powerful crime lord, the Kaiser Soze of this world. Terrifying underworld boss who also just happens to be a vampire. We kind of, by the end of the film, you kind of, acknowledge more or less he's Dracula. Like, that's, they don't say that. He actually says at one point when we finally do get to meet him, he says, I go by so many names. You're like, yeah, Dracula's one of them, motherfucker. So Giancarlo Esposito reveals himself as Lambert. He reveals himself to be basically Abigail's puppet. And he's been doing her bidding for these years, and he lured them there, and that's been going on for the past 2 years since she basically caught him betraying her father, and she turned him, and now he's her puppet. Okay, fine with that twist. That's cool. That's interesting, right? Like, all right. Now I get it. Like, now I get why you're bringing them in. Like, you're basically forced to bring them in because you're her puppet. The problem I had was then... Okay, so first we get Sammy gets turned, which is Catherine Newton's character. Again, I don't mind the whole idea she gets turned and we find out that Abigail can control her, which, you know, vampires have varying powers depending on what version.
Yeah, it's a cool little twist on the idea.
Yeah, like when you go to True Blood, they had the whole, what was it, what do they call it? Glamoring. And
Glamoring, yeah.
Where, you know, they could make you think or do whatever. So, okay, I'm fine with that. The puppet thing was kind of cool. Like, that was a little cool, different twist on a vampire mythology. I'm cool with that. Okay. So the same thing with Giancarlo's character. Okay, cool with that. But then he decides to say, hey, I don't want to be your puppet anymore. Dan Stevens, Frank, you were a corrupt cop. The only way we're going to make it out of here is if we kill Abigail and then we go after her father, who is the powerful crime lord. You and I are going to team up together. I'm going to turn you into a vampire, and we're going to finally have enough power to overpower Abigail and then go after her dad. Again, that's fine. Got no problem with that. The problem I had, Patrick, is then the story shifts because then Dan Stevens, Frank, becomes the big bad for the last 15 minutes of the movie. Yeah. You've spent all this time, and by the way, not to give away best performance, not to even get into this part yet, but I just want to give credit where credit's due. The little girl, Alicia Ware, who plays Abigail, again, remember, she's supposed to be hundreds of years old. I know we always talk about how kids can do. They got a good one here. Alicia Ware sells it. You believe, she has a couple really chilling lines in there. When she reveals she knows everything about these people. She knew their real names the whole time. She has masterminded this entire thing. Was her, this is her game to more or less fuck with her food. As she says that in the trailer, I like playing with my food. She's pretty sinister. Right? She's really sinister. You're like, damn, she's a good, but then they twist it. They make her kind of like the hero by the end, where she has to save Joey. And I'm like, why? You made this great villainous little vampire girl who was scary and sinister and totally evil. And then by the end, it's Dan Stevens who ends up being the big bad. And I'm like, why? It just felt unnecessary to me, Patrick. Now, maybe I'm overthinking it, but that was my biggest problem is you spent all this time creating this very dark, pretty sinister little girl vampire. And she does a great job, by the way. I mean, when she attacks them, when she's fucking with them in terms of I know you, I know your kids, I know this about you. When she lays all that out, you're like, oh shit. And again, it feels very Usual Suspects. The Kaiser Soze scene when they all realize who Kaiser Soze is, and then his associate comes in, Pete Postlethwaite, comes in and says, in 1984, you, Mr. Hockney, did this. And he's like, we basically got you dead to rights. You're fucked. You're owned by Kaiser Soze. You do what he says, or he's going to kill, which again, we all learned by the end of the movie. Sorry, spoilers for Usual Suspects. It was all a ruse. It was all a story. But in the moment, you're like, oh shit, this guy is that powerful. He is that kind of crime boss. That's how they built up Abigail. You're like, oh my God, she's a sinister, evil little girl who's not actually a little girl. But then you twist it at the end and make her kind of the good guy. I'm like, why would you do that? You just ruin you. That'd be like that would be like at the end of Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy's like, you know what, I feel kind of bad. You're having nightmares, so hell, let me give you a good dream. You wake up and fuck off.
Yeah.
What? Huh?
There's only one movie that's pulled that off where they make the bad guy kind of good near the end, and that's Jason and Freddy versus Jason. You kind of need him to help you because you're in trouble, even though he has slaughtered, at least 20 or so people in a cornfield, and a few others.
But you also, in that entire movie, you had Freddy as the other counterpart. You had no other counterpart in this movie. It was just
no counterpart. I would have been okay with maybe Giancarlo twisting against Abigail and then taking over and then just kind of laying waste to everybody. And then Melissa Barrera, because her character has been very faithful to not harming Abigail for most of the movie until she finds out she's a vampire, and she's like, yeah, we have to fucking kill her and get the fuck out of here. Like, she became the mastermind of trying to kill Abigail. So even that storyline didn't have teeth, no pun intended. It didn't. I would have rather just stuck with Abigail being as bad could be, with maybe Dan Stevens creating more complication by trying to manipulate the situation, which he kind of does. But to make her, I would have rather had like Dan Stevens and Abigail team up. She'd be like, you know what, Giancarlo just like fucking tried to double cross me. I need a real guy. I need a real like right hand. Seems like you're the kind of guy who can do it. And then they team up against Melissa Barrera. I might have bought that a little bit more. Then all of a sudden, like, Abigail has to come to the rescue of everybody, because Abigail's a fucking 200-year-old vampire that, by the way, has no proclivities about killing massive amounts of people to eat. So it doesn't quite ring for me. You know, like, I understand we're supposed to just let go and go, yeah, you know, in this instance, why can't she be good? Okay, she was, but it didn't particularly work. And not after making me wait so long to see her be bad and then to switch her over to be good. It didn't hit for me like that way. And it clearly probably didn't hit that way for you too.
It just, again, my problem isn't that it wasn't well done. It was that they made Abigail a really good, sinister villain. She was great. Like, she was terrifying in a way. Like, you're like, holy shit, like, she is this evil. I don't need her to switch, though. I don't need her to switch back. Like, you've now created a really sinister, great, evil little character in this Abigail. Let her be that. Let her be the bad guy. Let her be the one who is, like, trying to rip these people apart and, you know, kill them. I just didn't need the twist of, like, by the end it's Dan Stevens' character. Again, the movie's fine. I enjoyed the movie. I enjoy all the aspects, all the performances. Be clear about that. I liked everything, but that's the one thing that bugged me, because you just went one step too far, one twist too far, which was Dan Stevens kind of ends up being the bad guy at the end, and Abigail has to kind of save Joey. And I'm like, really? Like,
yeah,
you made her, she was, and again, I think it all goes to the heart of, you did such a good job of making Abigail a terrifying villain. You know, it would be like going back and seeing Megan, and at the end, Megan's a good person at the end. Like, Megan saves the day, and Megan, like, what? You spent this entire movie saying this AI robot is like this evil fucking maniacal creature, and now she's gonna save the day at the end and go, small wonder? Like, what?
That's a good point. Yeah, it would be like making Megan the good guy at the end. By the way, Megan will probably be the good guy by the end of Megan 2. Trust me. Yeah. Like, I can already feel that coming, because people love her too much. So I'm sure we'll get into maybe some of that in our categories.
You have to, if you're going to lean into having a child vampire, and again, they make it very clear, she's not really a child. Much like Let the Right One In, she is actually an ancient vampire who just has stuck in a child's body because she was turned when she was a child. But she's like hundreds of years old. She says that, I'm hundreds of years old. So you have to get your head wrapped around, like, oh yeah, she looks like a 12-year-old kid, but she's actually hundreds of years old. She is a very adult vampire. And I think that's where they did the twist at the end. They're like, oh, we got to save the little girl. That's kind of what I thought they were going for, you know? So
I don't know. And I wasn't into it.
Yeah. But again, like I said, that was my even beyond the trailers, which I had a huge problem with because of what it was, my biggest problem is that, like, it went too far. I really liked Abigail. I really liked that she was this evil. I mean, geez, man, they really did a good job. When she gets loose in there, holy shit. She is a vengeful little creature. And I loved it. I loved how nasty and evil she was. But then it's just like, I don't need her to be a good guy at the end.
Yeah. No? Save that for a sequel.
Yeah. Like, she should have been like, when her dad shows up, she should have been like, yeah, let's kill Melissa Barrera and eat her together. That would have been better. Like, you know.
And her dad only shows up at the end, by the way, for anyone curious. Like, he's not a factor in the movie.
Which, by the way, I do want to give a shout out. When I saw him, I was like, I know this guy.
I know, me too.
Yeah. And I looked him up afterwards. It's Matthew Good who plays him. And Matthew Good is not like a super, super famous actor, but when I realized where I knew him from, he played Ozymandias in Zack Snyder's Watchmen, which I adore that movie.
Yeah,
I love the Watchmen movie. He plays Ozymandias, who is always, so I read the Watchmen comic when I was younger, and it is the way I read about it, which I know is terrible for a comic book fan to admit this, the reason I read The Watchmen was because when Lost came out in the early 2000s, Damon Lindelof, the creator, said Watchmen was his favorite comic, and I was like, how have I never read The Watchmen? I was a comic book collector my entire life, but Watchmen came out in the 80s. I was too little at that point to understand The Watchmen. So I got the graphic novel in the early 2000s, read it, absolutely loved it. It is as brilliant as you say, but Ozymandias was always my favorite character. He was the smartest man in the world. That's what they called him. And so in the movie, Matthew Good plays Ozymandias, and I loved it. Adrian Veidt is his name, Ozymandias. I loved that character. He's just brilliant, that entire movie, that entire book. And so when he popped in here, I was like, where do I know him from? He was Ozymandias, so I had to give a shout out to Matthew Good. He's in it for like 3 minutes, but 3 minutes he's in, he's great. So let's get into categories, Patrick, and we're going to kick things off as we do each and every week on the show here. We're going to start things off with best performance. So, Patrick, when it comes to Abigail, who gets your award for best performance?
This probably doesn't come as a surprise to you, but to anyone who has watched the movie, this might be a little bit of a shock. My best performance goes to William Catlett, who played Rickles. He was this in the trailer. You see him like realize that they're locked in there. He's one of the guys who's like shaking the bars, going, "Oh shit, we're locked in." He turns out to be ex-military. He's almost like a counterpart to Melissa Barrera's character, Joey. He's ex-military, as is she, and it seems like he might have been a military sniper or Marine or something like that. And you could just tell he's more of a trustworthy guy. He's a very grounded character. And I think that's why I preferred him, because all the other characters outside of Melissa Barrera were very much like heightened characters. They were caricatures, and that's not typical, or that's atypical to most heist movies anyway, or especially comedy heist. Like everybody's sort of a cartoon character, if you will. He was more serious, and he just felt like he could get shit done, and you wanted to trust him. But Abigail gets a hold of him pretty quick in the movie. But I liked his performance.
Yeah, he was good. He played a stoic Marine, which is what he was. He was more like the serious. He was there to do a job, and he was not like everyone else, kind of beyond him and Joey, who were the former military people. And to a lesser extent, Dan Stevens' character, he was kind of like the little bit of the leader of the group. But like everybody else who was there was like younger or just kind of like fucking around. Like Peter being Kevin Durant, he was drinking, and you had Angus Cloud's character, who was just like, he's like, he's
stoner, fucking around.
Yeah. Everyone else is.
He was being Angus Cloud, is what he was being.
Yeah, everyone else is like, this is an easy gig. We just kidnapped a girl. We're just waiting for the payoff. We don't give a fuck. And he's like the one who's being serious. Like, no, we need to pay attention to like what's going on here, because no one just gives up $50 million without bad things happening. So we need to be really alert. And so at one point he actually goes to Melissa Barrera's character, who is also ex-military, and he's like, we need to watch each other's back because these people are going to fuck up. And she's like, yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So I liked him.
So my best performance, which I kind of already mentioned it, I didn't want to ruin it, but I am going to throw it out here now. I want to give credit where credit's due. I like Melissa Barrera. She's quickly become one of my favorite actors. Everything I've seen her in, she's great. But again, that kind of goes without saying, because she's very much the lead. But I want to give my best performance to Alicia Ware, who played Abigail. She is 14 years old, and she's been in a few things. She was in Matilda, the musical, which was a big Broadway, stage show, whatever. She was in that. And she's been in a couple other movies, a couple other little things. Wicked Little Letters, I think, is a thing that she's around. And she was in The Wizard of Oz on stage, Oliver, Annie, things like that. But for the most part, I'd never really seen her before. But she did an incredible job. And I know we talk about how a young actor, for better or worse, can make your movie or break your movie when you make them the lead or one of the leads. I think part of my biggest problem with that whole twist at the end, where she kind of saves the day and saves Joey, they did such a good job. She does such a good job playing a terrifying, sinister little vampire. When she's laying out to them like she knows their entire life stories, which was great that they didn't just hammer you over the head with backstory. Like it's like a 3-minute scene where she's like, Frank, you were a corrupt cop, and you did this and this, and you indirectly, you kind of got seduced by the life of my father, and before busting his top 3 lieutenants. Joey, you were a drug addict and this and that. And Peter, you used to work for a crime organization in Canada who was a off branch for my father. Again, very Kaiser Soze moment where, they lay out how they're all connected to her father. She does a great job. And I'm like, damn, this is pretty good acting chops for a 14-year-old girl. And I thought she did a great job. And she's terrifying. She is a terrifying little girl.
Like I had trouble with performances in this movie. And it's mainly because of 2 factors. One, the trailer ruins so much. And so I already knew what I was getting with Abigail in the trailer. That's not her fault. Like I knew it was coming. And then 2, once we got into the part of the movie that I didn't know was coming, it was super predictable. So I just had trouble with performances in this movie. So she didn't jump out to me. I know everybody has been praising her performance. Great job, for her and all that stuff. She did not stand out to me. It really did. Remember when we did Pope's Exorcist and the kid is like possessed the whole time and he's trying to be like villainous? That's definitely not what this performance is, but it kind of rang like that because I think so much of this movie had been tainted for me just by being super predictable and largely spoiled. Especially some of her best moments are in the trailers, and then that weird twist in the end where she's supposed to be good for a little bit. Like all of it, I was just like, I'm not vibing with this. It's not a knock on her performance. I had a lot of trouble with performances in this movie because of how it all laid out.
But as we said, if you eliminate that trailer aspect of it, and again, I know you have to kind of use your imagination.
That's harder to answer. For her performance, it's much harder to answer than just knowing how. Like, I just wasn't surprised by anything, and I'm not big on this. By the way, makes sense. It makes sense that like she acts like an adult because she's 200 years old. She's actually very mature. I don't always like those performances. And there's a performance that I love where a kid played an old vampire, Homer in Near Dark. Homer in Near Dark is one of my favorites because he does kind of act like a kid, but he also he's kind of gone crazy from being stuck in a kid's body for, I don't know. I think for him, it was only like 80 or 90 years or something like that. He's been a kid. It's driving him insane. And that's how he's behaving. So he's like almost twisted in 2 worlds where he's like, what do you want me to do? I'm a kid, but I'm not a kid. It's fucking me up. So he acts that way. And that's kind of a lightning in a bottle performance. Like it just by chance really worked out really well. So if I hold it to that standard, or if I hold it to the standard from Let the Right One In, they don't to me, this performance doesn't compare to those. It's not a fair comparison because I knew too much of the movie coming in and all that stuff. I don't have tons to say about her performance because so much of it was messed up by the predictability of the movie and the tons of spoilers that came out of the trailer.
And see, I totally disagree with that because while I get what you're saying about the Homer character in Near Dark, like that's the choice to make with that character. That's the script from Catherine Bigelow. Like
I resonated with that choice. That one really worked for me.
And what I liked about this performance and this particular character, again, eliminating what I knew going in from the trailer, was that her delivery was spot on, and that's what I enjoy. When she threatens them, she feels threatening. When she tells them like you're all about to die, you believe that they're all about to die. When she delivers that line, even in the trailer, when she says, "I'm sorry, what's about to happen to you," I'm like, again, if they would have just cut off the trailer at that point, which would have been perfect, and not told us she was a vampire, when she delivered that line in the trailer very like softly and quietly, and she's like, "I'm sorry, what's about to happen to you," I was like, oh fuck. Like, a lot of kids would give that line, you're like, oh, all right, that's not really scary. Like, you're still a kid. She delivers it, and I'm like, damn, like, that's scary. So, yeah, I disagree there, because, again, like, when I think of Near Dark, like, yeah, I get it. Like, that's a choice. I get it. That's a choice, and that's fine. It didn't really blow me away. I love that movie. That's not really one that stands out for me. This one, I thought she really did stand out. And, again, maybe I'm grading on a different scale because I do tend to think that, children have a tough job when you're playing that kind of role. And I thought she did a great job. So, yeah.
She didn't do a bad job. I'm not saying she did a bad job, but so many of these performances are tainted because of the because of the story and the
You're
trailer
really,
for me.
you're really holding on to that one. So yeah, it's hard to-
It ruined so much of the movie. I mean, just on a logical level, it ruined so much of the movie.
Let's talk about MVP, and that is the most valuable performance in this movie, or most valuable player in this movie, depending on how you look at it. That is the Ken Foray Banana Hammock MVP Award, named after great character actor Ken Foray, who in the movie From Beyond jumped down a flight of stairs and down into a basement to stop a creature with a butcher knife wearing nothing but a thong bikini. If that's not an MVP performance, I don't know what is. And Patrick, I'm going to kick things off here because originally, I do this a lot when we do MVP. I tend to name like a director, a writer, somewhere in there, because I do appreciate that. Now, and my original MVP was going to be Radio Silence because, as I said, they've been not your cup of tea necessarily every time, but what I've loved about them is they've been consistent. They've not made my favorite. They've not made my favorite films of the year, but everything they've done that I've seen, I've enjoyed. Maybe not my favorite film of the year, but I've enjoyed it. Ready or Not, I really enjoyed it. Scream 5, flawed, but I still enjoyed it. Scream 6, I loved it, and this one I really enjoyed as well. But I'm going to go a different direction. I'm going to bring it on a little bit more of a somber note, and that is my MVP goes to Angus Cloud. Couple reasons for that. One, this was his final role on film, as it's been well documented. If you see this movie and you stick around to the credits, which I'd recommend doing, they pay credit to him right at the very top of the credits. They say, we love Angus, for love, and Angus Cloud. Sadly, of course, we all know he passed away 25 years old. Incredibly tragic. The reason why I give him MVP is because Angus Cloud, if you watched interviews with him, he had no intention of being an actor. He was walking down the street in New York, and a casting director passed by and said, "You have a look. You should come in and read for a part, and I think you'd be great for this." And he was just like, "The fuck? All right." And he did it. It worked. He got cast as Fezco in Euphoria. And Angus Cloud, for the most part, from everything we've seen or everything you've heard, is playing Angus Cloud in Euphoria. He's playing himself as Fezco as the character. He has such a charming delivery in that show that you can't help but love him, even in the moments, which, sorry, spoilers for Euphoria, that's been out for 5 years now and probably never going to have another season. There's a great part in season 2 where he snaps and beats up Jacob Elordi's character because Jacob Elordi ratted him out, and he cracks him over the head with a fucking bottle and beats the absolute shit out of him at a party. When he gets up and walks away and like everyone's like, damn, like that was intense, he still has this just innocent look of like naivete in a way. Like there's just an innocence to him. Like there's just a charming innocence to this character you loved. Now, to be fair, once again, Angus Cloud is playing Angus Cloud in Abigail. They don't try to make him be something he's not. He is very much a New York kid with that street attitude, almost like a hip hop attitude to him. The reason why I give him MVP is because we got one more Angus Cloud, because we're not going to give him Euphoria. Sadly, we know that. We don't even know if that show's ever coming back again. I know he did a couple other smaller projects that had come out before this. I know he did, I can't remember what the name, he did a couple other smaller things, but this was his last film role. And for the 25 or 35 or 45 minutes he's in this movie until his character dies, spoiler, he plays Angus Cloud. He feels like you're getting Fezco for 45 more minutes. You're getting Angus Cloud for 45 more minutes. And as a huge fan of Euphoria, and as a huge fan of this kid, just reading up on him and like seeing interviews, just seeing like how he really just fell into this, and people loved him. And I loved that character. He was my favorite character on Euphoria. To get him for 45 more minutes was a gift. So that's why I give him MVP, because I just loved seeing him for 45 more minutes.
Fantastic tribute to the late and great Angus Cloud. And you're right, and I'm going to echo it. It was great to get one more side mission with Fezco, like maybe his last mission, right? He almost kind of felt like that. I'll tell you this too, and I'm going to echo this, and it'll roll right into who my MVP was. Angus Cloud was one part of two parts of this movie that I really enjoyed, which I told you I liked the humor in this movie. For two particular characters, and Angus Cloud's was one of them, because he is so charming. He is very much Angus Cloud. He is doing the Angus Cloud thing. I was there with my brother. Shout out to Schwenk. We were both there laughing our asses off. We both love Euphoria. Anytime he was sweating Sammy, who Catherine Newton's character, he wanted to hook up with Sammy. He was hot for her, and he was doing it in his funny Fezco, Angus Cloud, stoner sort of way. It totally fucking worked. It was funny. It almost felt like they didn't write lines for him, like they had placeholder lines, and they go, "All right, Angus, you're up. Like, do your thing with Catherine, and let's see how it goes." And it came out funny, and we got kicks out of it. We both laughed. So he's a big contributor. That he's totally co MVP for me because he's a big contributor to the things that I liked about this movie, which was some of the humor, some of it, not all of it. And so my MVP turned out to be Kevin Durant, the big tough character actor, 6'5", whatever dude who's been in a ton of different things. Kevin Durant was my MVP because he was the funniest motherfucker in this movie. And you don't really know Kevin Durant to be a funny guy. I've seen him in a lot of stuff. He's usually a heavy. He might have one smart thing to say. He's had a couple of roles where he was sort of a more intellectual guy. This is not that role for him. He is admittedly a heavy. He's admittedly a tough guy. That's his job. His job is to be muscle. And he brought a lot of very like innocent humor to this movie. And we have a category that will accentuate that in a little while. But yeah, Kevin Durant, Angus Cloud both came together, and their characters, their reactionary humor was really effective in this movie.
Kevin Durant is typically, as you said, the heavy. He's typically the bad guy, kind of the goon, the henchman, the bad guy. He is that in Lost. He does play a good guy in The Strain, which was fun to see him kind of stretch his muscles in that show a little bit, where he got to be the good guy, kind of the hero in that show, in that show for several seasons. So I did enjoy him in that. But typically, yeah, he's kind of like the muscle, the henchman, and he's very much that in this movie as well. But he has that kind of comedic twist to him, and he's what I would call dim-witted charm.
Yeah, totally.
They're not telling you he's the smartest guy in the world. They're telling you he's not the smartest guy in the world, and it works for him because he is kind of the dim-witted muscles. I call it dim-witted charm. Like, he's charming, but he's not the brightest guy. He's not the brightest bulb in the Christmas tree, and I did enjoy that. And I did enjoy that role because again, you kind of get used to that. You know, he's like, because when you watch him in Lost, like, he's an evil bastard in Lost.
Yeah.
You saw him in Lost, like, he's an evil bastard in Lost. And a lot of stuff he plays, he kind of has that similar role. But in this one, he's very dim-witted charming. And I did enjoy that very much. So I agree. So yeah, kind of funny that both of our answers were kind of like the most charming parts of this movie were Angus Cloud, which again, sadly, he's gone, but also Kevin Durant for kind of playing a character not really of himself, which was fun. Let's talk about best scare, because this is a horror movie, but let's be honest about this, Patrick. This is not a jump scare fest, you know. This isn't that kind of movie. This isn't like a disturbing movie. It is a gory movie. If you are a gore hound, if you are not a gore hound, that's where you're probably going to get grossed out by this movie. There's a fuck ton of blood.
Very bloody.
But it's not like, you know, a lot of, but I appreciate that because I think a lot of times you do fall into a trap with these kind of horror comedies where it's all about the jump scares and it just gets overdone and you just see it coming 1,000 miles away every single time. The fact that they didn't do that with this movie, I kind of appreciate it because the scarier moments, in my opinion, well, I'm not, like, when I say scary, I'm saying like, are the more like menacing moments. Like I said, when Abigail's like threatening them, like those are like the scarier moments. They're not scary, but like they're kind of like the tension inducing moments.
Yeah, there's more tension in this movie than anything else. And so I had trouble really like, and I maybe should have gone for some other, or maybe even omitted this category this time because it doesn't really apply. But I tried to find something to make sure we had a best scare because damn it, we're a horror podcast. Let's find a scare. And really early on in the movie, when shit is kind of hitting the fan, or not, sorry, no, even earlier back, it's much earlier in the movie, which is when they are actually going to kidnap Abigail. They get into that room and she's asleep or she's in her room. I can't remember what she was doing. And out of nowhere, a black leather glove comes over her face. It would have been even scarier if I didn't know that part was coming. But they literally show you all the run up and all of the getting prepared to capture her. So I knew that was coming. It was just there was a great stinger on it, like kind of a sound effect, like a dan, and the glove kind of comes out of nowhere and grabs her hand. It was kind of classic in that respect, like classic kidnap thrillers from the 80s and 90s would kind of pull that off a little bit, and they did it here too.
So I struggled with this category because there weren't one, but there was one that didn't get me. So I'm being clear about this. Didn't get me, but I went with my girlfriend and it got her. She about jumped out of her fucking seat and it was hilarious. And when we left the theater, we were like, I was like, what do you think? She's like, yeah, it was pretty good. She's like, it wasn't scary at all. And when she says that, I'm like, okay, it's not really a scary movie because your wife and my girlfriend, we always kind of judge a little bit by them because when they get scared, we're like, okay, even if we weren't scared, it worked because they're the general movie-going audience. She even said, like, this didn't really scare me, but that one moment she jumped and it cracked me up. And it's not even the part with the fucking vampire. Early in the movie, when they're all like dispersing through the house and they're all just kind of like going their own way, and they basically said, we just have to hang out for 24 hours until this ransom is paid. Sammy, being Catherine Newton's character, goes into a bedroom and she's going to go to sleep. And she's watching cartoons in a darkened room and this like little black and white TV, and she's watching old like Looney Tunes type cartoons. And out of nowhere behind her, Angus Cloud's character lights up a blunt, and he's wearing like an old Halloween mask, a little, one of those like rubber band masks.
Yeah.
Like, and she jumps and she's like, what the fuck? And he was like trying to play a prank on her, and he's like basically trying to hook up with her, and she's more or less like tells him to get the hell out. But when that lighter flicked on and you see like the kind of shadow of the mask, my girlfriend about jumped out of her chair. And I was like, that's the moment, because it didn't get me. I swear it didn't get me, but it got her. And she about jumped 3 feet out of her chair when that thing flicked on. So I was like, you know what? For a vampire movie, none of the vampire stuff scared her. But that moment when that lighter flicked on scared the piss out of her. So I was like, that's the one.
That's funny because I that was another one that was in the running for me to choose, and they both are way before anything vampire happens.
Yeah.
Like they have nothing to do with vampire at all. Like so, but those are the two ones I was like, it's between these two, so I went with the other one. I'm glad you picked that one.
It's just funny because she jumped, like she like literally in her seat. She's like, "Oh shit!" Oh, it worked. That one worked. That was good. Let's talk about best gore now. Okay, this movie didn't have a lot of scares. Yeah, fuckload of gore.
Yeah, this is where the movie excels, Damon. This is where it does something good.
If I had seen this movie twice, probably we could have like a top 10 list of like, let's go 10-1, our favorite gory moments in this movie, 'cause there's a lot. But what was your favorite gore, your best gore in Abigail?
My favorite gore ultimately came down to just but it's not even maybe the most gory you've seen, but I thought for sure there wouldn't be anything that could beat this, but some things tried, was what I call the gore pool. And at some point, Sammy, Catherine Newton's character, is running for her life and falls into a pit of bodies, Damon, right out of the descent, except now it's not hidden by shadows and shit. The light is shown on what is a swimming pool, like an indoor swimming pool in this mansion, overflowing with dead bodies. And it's just a gigantic mound of gore. And the detail that I absolutely loved about this was all the coagulated blood and fat that was hanging out at the surface of the pool. And by the way, barely any surface because it's stuffed with bodies. I mean, there has to be 150 bodies jammed in this pool, but those bodies have fluids, they have blood, and they have fats and plasmas that coagulate as they rot. And I loved that little detail. Like when Catherine Newton is dipping up and down in that water, I go, that's the most disgusting water I've ever seen, period. That's it. That's as nasty and disgusting as it got.
That was really disgusting. I think the only thing that rivals that in terms of like the most disgusting water ever is when Andy crawls to freedom in Shawshank Redemption, and you know he's crawling through a river of shit because it's literally a sewage pipe, and you're like, You know what he's crawling through? That's pretty disgusting. And they did a really good job with the effects of when she falls in that pool and you realize what she's laying in. You're like, oh no, this is bad. Yeah, it was pretty gross. It's pretty disgusting. So I cheated a little bit because again, there's so much gore in this movie. I feel like we're remiss if I didn't mention more. So I kind of cheated with my one type of gore that I loved. Originally, I went with when they finally hurt Abigail in this movie. They can't do anything to her. She kicks the shit out of all of them, and she's way more powerful, stronger. Like she's just not. You're not gonna fuck with her. But at one point, they realize like the one thing they can get her with is sunlight. The sun has finally come up, and so they break out a board because when they realize like the entire house is encapsulated in boards and it's been covered, and like they're basically in darkness even during the daytime. They break a couple of the boards, and a light shines across, very classic vampire, and it hits her hand, and her hand explodes, and she kind of scurries back into the shadows again. But when her hand explodes, it was pretty gnarly, and that was my original gore. I was like, damn, that was pretty cool. Her hand exploded. But then throughout the movie, we figure out that when you kill a vampire in Abigail, it's very much like True Blood, whereas you stab, and there's no like long drawn out death scene. There's no like melting or like, oh, I'm dying. No, they just fucking explode and it's everywhere. So that's my favorite gore, the way they killed the vampires in this movie. From her hand, which was really cool, just that effect of her hand blowing off, to the vampires in general. When you kill them, they just full on fucking explode, and it is just like a gore fest of blood flying everywhere. I loved it because by the end of this movie, everybody was covered in blood at some point, like whether they were killed or they were, survived and got blown with other, got covered in somebody else's blood. I love the way they killed the vampires so violently and so bloody.
Oh yeah, I mean at least two vampires completely explode, and there's I don't know about 300 gallons of blood in each of them. Like you just like Melissa Barrera in the end, it's hard to even tell it's her. There's so much blood all over. Very reminiscent actually of the end of Ready or Not, because at the end of that, spoiler alert, everybody fucking explodes too. So yeah, kind of it was a little throwback, maybe even a little callback to Ready or Not. I saw it like that. And then you did mention the stump. The great little detail in that was her hand explodes when it touched the sunlight, which I love, and she recoils in pain. And I go, huh, that's interesting. And then I go, is that the first time she's ever been gotten with sunlight? It can't be. She's 200 years old. It's not, because her type of vampire can regrow her hand. So, right, she's holding that bloody, nasty stub, and it's starting to grow as she's holding it. And that in and of itself was kind of disgusting too. Just watching the blood and the bone start to regrow as it was going on. So these kind of vampires can regenerate. That kind of makes sense.
It reminded me a little bit of the scene in Deadpool when he cuts off his own hand to get out of the handcuffs, and he's back at the place with his roommate. He's got the baby hand.
Yeah.
So creepy. The baby hand is so creepy. He rubs her head, and I'm like, oh, it's so gross. He's got a baby hand. So disgusting. That was very much what Abigail was. I enjoyed that. All right, now this is a horror comedy, and as I said, weirdly, there's a lot of comedy, but I actually thought it would be goofier than what it was, and it wasn't. As you said, I think this is kind of to your point, where this is more reactionary humor than the self-aware humor. I actually expected it to be more self-aware, kind of goofy humor. It wasn't that. So when I talked earlier about it not being as comedy-laced as I thought it would be, I think that's kind of to your point, where it is more reactionary humor, where something happens and they kind of say something back kind of funny, and that's where I said that's kind of the humor that I typically do enjoy. So I think we're agreeing on that. So
yeah, I think so.
This is a horror comedy. It's not just doused in dumb comedy. It's not that. I appreciated that. But what was your favorite comedic moment in Abigail?
My favorite laugh comes from Kevin Durant's character, who plays Peter. Again, he reacts in the moment. Now, here's the difference between reactionary humor and self-aware humor. Is that in a moment of panic, a self-aware humorous character would make a clear joke. They would almost stop what's going on to make a joke and look around aren't I being funny? Isn't this funny? there's a moment where they're freaking out when they first realize that Abigail is a vampire. So they all rush the fuck out of there. They close the door and they're like, shit. And she's mad as fuck. And she's ready to fucking tear their heads off. And they run down there and they're kind of in a panic and they need to figure out what to do. And the whole gang goes, what do we know about vampires? And Peter, Kevin Durant's character, just instinctually goes, they aren't real. Like that, his reaction, that makes total sense. When you're panicking in a moment and somebody says, what do we know about vampires? And he just went, they're not real. Even though he just saw one for real for the first time. He wasn't trying to make a joke. You could just see that this big lug was in a full blown panic. And what he said was funny. They're not real. Motherfucker, we just saw a real vampire. What do you mean they aren't real? Like, no, and nobody had to say that. They let the joke hang. That's reactionary humor. He didn't know he was being funny in that moment. That's the kind of humor I fuck with. And that got a big laugh out of me.
Yeah, that was a great line. And that you know what, actually going back to like films comparing this to is like, you know, I know we reviewed this and you didn't love it, but there was elements you enjoyed. When we reviewed From Dusk Till Dawn, imagine going into From Dusk Till Dawn and knowing that when they go to that bar, the vampires come out. Like how much that would have ruined that movie. One of the most enjoyable parts about From Dusk Till Dawn is when you're going through this kidnapping and these criminals and you're down in Mexico and then there's fucking vampires out of nowhere. Like you're like, what the fuck? Like where'd this come from? Yeah. That's the genuine joy of From Dusk Till Dawn. Imagine knowing that going in. Now I don't remember seeing the trailers when that came out. Maybe it was ruined the trailers. I'd have to go back and rewatch the classic trailers to remember that. But I don't think they were. I don't think if my memory serves me correctly, they didn't tell you that there was vampires. You know something bad happens, but like you don't know what happens, and so. Like, that's kind of what Abigail does. Like, imagine going into From Dusk Till Dawn, like, you're watching the first half of the movie, and you know they're leading to a bar filled with vampires. You'd be like, what the fuck? Like, what's going on? Why are they just...
Get to it already.
Yeah. My favorite comedic line, I had a couple that were pretty good lines. There were some good, funny lines in this movie. But my favorite was late in the movie, even though, again, I didn't love the twist that Dan Stevens becomes kind of like the bad guy at the end, and Abigail has to kind of save the day. I don't like that. But there was one great part. They all see Sammy get controlled by Abigail. Sammy becomes Abigail's puppet, and she's literally acting out exactly what Abigail tells her to do. And so when Dan Stevens, Frank, becomes a vampire, he bites Joey, and he basically is like, okay, now you're under my control, just like Abigail. And he tells her what to do, and it doesn't work. It fucks up, and they tackle him, and they're ready to kill him. And Abigail delivers my favorite line when she says, you have to be a vampire for a long time to know how to do the cool shit. I was like, that was a great line. Like, cause he's just like, kind of like the hubris of like, I'm a vampire. Of course I can do the fun stuff. And she's like, yeah, you got to be a vampire for a while to know how to do the cool shit.
Yeah, that's the kind of humor that didn't necessarily work for me. That was a little more on the self-aware side, not totally, but it was a little bit like, I don't know, explainy, you know, a little more expository than I wanted. And they did the right thing, by the way. Like in a technical sense, in a craft sense, they covered some exposition in a joke. That's a move you do. She made a joke, but it explained something. The joke's on you, pal. You have to be a vampire for a while before the cool shit happens. It was a joke, but it explains why Dan Stevens' powers didn't work on Joey. So that it's fair game. You know what I mean? There's no point deduction. It was just not my kind of humor.
Yeah, but I like that line because like he kind of got a little cocky. He's like, I'm a vampire now. I'm a badass vampire for 10 minutes. And she's like, hold on now, fucko. Like you've been, it takes some time. You might be a vampire, but you're not like 100 years old vampire. So like, slow down.
Here's a great example of actual self-aware humor in this movie that I did not care for. And it's in the trailer. So I don't feel like I'm like belaboring anything. There's a moment in the trailer that turns out to be late in the movie where Dan Stevens, you can see that he has killed somebody. He's covered in blood. It turns out he had killed Lambert, and he thought he had nearly killed Abigail, and then he just stops for a second and just looks down and goes, "I fucking hate the ballet," or something like that.
Yeah.
Like he literally just stopped to make a joke.
Yeah.
Some people love that, Damon. I'm not here to yuck your yum. What I want to do is I want to give people an example of what I'm talking about. Because I go, what the fuck does he mean self-aware humor? In
Yeah.
the middle of all this fucking craziness, he stopped to just make a joke, seemingly to himself, like no one's around. Like, he just did it to say it. And I'm like, okay, that's self-aware humor. When I say I don't like self-aware humor, that's what I'm talking about. He literally just stops to make a joke with basically no one around. So I guess he's just making a joke to us.
I would agree that one didn't work for me either. But that's why I said I like the Abigail line, because it's actually explaining something to you in a
Yeah.
joke form, as you said. Like, she's like, hold on now. Like, as I said, like, hold on, fucko. Like,
Yeah,
you
she
don't have
hid
to
it
do
in
bullshit.
she hid some exposition in a joke. That's fair game.
Yeah, but that's what I said. Like, that worked for me. I agree with you. The ballet line did not work. When I saw that in the movie, it was almost cringy in a way. I was like, it's just
Yeah, it's pretty. I didn't like it a lot.
Yeah, it's like when you make. It's like you gotta like. There's the self-aware humor when it works, when it can be good, when it can be funny and stupid. Is like when you do like the Die Hard lines, when John McClane says like, the ho ho ho, I have a machine gun now, stuff like that. Like, there's some funny lines in that movie which are a little self-aware, but they're still kind of goofy and fun and things like that. But yeah, when you go a little over the top, like you literally stop in the middle of the scene and go, I fucking hate the ballet. Like, oh Jesus Christ. Like,
Yeah, that's I wanted to make a moment to clarify, because I was like, there's actually a good example of why this humor worked for me and this one doesn't.
yeah. So let's move on to our next category, which is remake, sequel, or leave it alone. And that is, of course, pretty self-explanatory, but just for people maybe new here, this is a category where we take whatever film we are reviewing and we say, should they remake it? Should they give it a sequel? Or should they just leave it alone the way it is? So, Patrick, I feel like I know your answer here. Abigail, remake, sequel, leave it alone.
I would have guessed that this would be a leave it alone situation, but I just heard recently that the Radio Silence crew is thinking about doing a sequel to Ready or Not, which to me also has a very leave it alone vibe. It's like, okay, we told this story. No, turns out we're going to tell more of that story. Whatever they do, I'm probably going to go see it because we're going to talk about it on the podcast anyway, so I guess I'm in. So I would have said the same about Abigail, but they really do set this up to keep going. Abigail survives, and now her father is involved too. Lazar, he's part of this whole thing. So, and Melissa Barrera's character survives. So I'm like, well, there's more to do in this universe. So I guess I feel like they did that on purpose to set us up for a sequel.
Yeah, I thought you would have gone remake and just don't show us the trailers, and I would have said that's like
Damon, we can't do miracles on this podcast, but that's the way you go. You just make this how about just remake the trailers? Like just remake the trailers, please.
So I'm gonna say sequel, mostly because this is so set up for a sequel. Like, it's perfectly set up for a sequel. And also, here's the thing. I know I'm beating a dead horse. I'm complaining about the same thing. People are like, shut the fuck up already. I get it. If you do this movie as a surprise, and that in an hour we learn it's a vampire, you're like, holy shit, it's a vampire. The second movie, the sequel, okay, we know going in Abigail's a vampire. We know her dad is Dracula or whatever we're going to call him. That's where you can start putting in more of the twists and turns, the stuff that I didn't like about Dan Stevens being the bad guy at the end and Abigail kind of becoming the good person. Didn't need that. I would have preferred it, not to be morbid, I would have preferred it if Melissa Barrera's character died, everyone dies, and you're just left with Abigail and her father, and they're left to kind of carry on this, like, this empire of evil, more or less. And then you move into a sequel, and it's different setting, and then you already know going into it that Abigail is a vampire and her dad is Dracula, and then you can do some twists and turns, and that's where maybe you can introduce another bad guy and you kind of twist it around where Abigail becomes the hero. Okay, fine. Because then you already know. You know going into it. So I'm going to say sequel, and they're still going to probably make that movie now where Abigail is kind of the hero, which is odd to think, but that would have been my preference, which is I didn't know what Abigail was going in. She's a vampire. Now going into the sequel, we're going to twist and turn, and maybe there's the Dan Stevens-like character that becomes the big bad and all those. Because, sequel's the answer because it's kind of perfectly set up for that. I just kind of wish they had, if I had one major thing I could change beyond not knowing the trailers, it would have been cooler if everyone died. Like, everybody doesn't make it out. I know the whole character, Melissa Barrera, she's a mom who's been a kind of an absentee mother. Oh, also, what I do want to mention, this is going way off topic. I do want to mention one other thing about this movie that I fucking loved. I loved it in this movie. So we know that Melissa Barrera's character is an absentee mom and she was a drug addict. She was a junkie, and they bring that up several times in this movie. She's trying to get back to her son. And everything in this movie is set up for, like, I just want to get back to him. I just want to be a mom to him. And there's a great moment in the movie where Dan Stevens turns to her very matter-of-factly, and he's just like, go be a fucking mom. Stop making excuses. Go be there for your kid. Like, stop talking about, well, if I do this, or if I hadn't done this, or if I don't do this, or I need this money to set. Stop making excuses. Go be a fucking mom. Yeah. And in the movie, my girlfriend tapped me and she's like, that's true. And I was like, you're absolutely right. Like, the entire movie is kind of like Joey's sob story of like how she wants to get reconnected with her son, but she can't quite get there. She's not ready to be there for him yet. She's still getting over being a drug addict, and she wants the $7 million so she has something to go back to him too. And at one point, Dan Stevens is almost like, stop with the bullshit. Go be a mom.
Yeah. No, it's true. And I don't want to get into it because it'll take us another hour. I wasn't in love with how they set up Melissa Barrera's character. It didn't work for me. She's a great actor. That's not what I'm getting at. I didn't like her story, and I didn't buy it. And really, Dan Stevens' character saying that to her like diffuses it all anyway, because it's the archetype of the mom who's trying to make up for being a bad absentee mother. Well, when Frank just walks up and goes, hey, how about you just go be his mom? That's what he wants.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. So we just screwed like this whole archetype that has been moving through this movie for over an hour and a half already. And you go, yeah, with that logic, I can't fucking argue, Frank. She should just go be his mom. I don't care how much money she has. Why is she off running and doing heists and shit? Just go be his mom. Like, that's really all you need.
And you know what? The reason why I appreciated that, though, is because the archetype that they were building her into was so stereotypical. The fact that
super stereotypical,
yeah. I was just kind of like, good. Like, yeah, you're right. Like, stop making excuses. Like, because like you're supposed to feel sympathetic to her the entire movie. You're supposed to be like, she's like this mother trying to get her act together and trying to be there for her kid. And at one point, he just calls her on her bullshit. And he's like, go be a mom. Like, stop making excuses. Go. That's what he wants. He wants you there. He doesn't give a fuck what you are or what you did or where you were. Go be a mom. And I'm like, yes, exactly. So,
yeah, again, it is a fantastic line, honestly.
Yeah, because it's one you don't see coming. It's one that you totally expect the entire movie is going to be built around feeling sympathetic towards Joey. And he calls her on her bullshit at one point. I'm like, wow, they actually called her on her bullshit. Because it's true. Just go be a mom. Like, stop making excuses.
Yeah, except that it completely makes her like, oh yeah, you are just a fucking wishy-washy person. Well, and so then you're done caring for her at that point. You're like, oh yeah, Dan's right. She should just go out there and be this kid's mom. She's just fucking off right now fighting vampires.
That's why at the end I was kind of like, you know what, you could full on Reservoir Dogs this thing and just everyone dies. Like, I'm totally okay.
I think it would have been a better movie, actually. Not because I'm rooting for anyone to die in particular, but I think it makes the playing field very clean for the next movie.
Yeah. So anyways, that's like I said, I found that line really funny because you don't, trust me, there's 1,000 versions of this same kind of movie where the entire movie is built around you're supposed to feel sympathetic and sad for Joey just desperately trying to get back to her kid. And the fact that he called her on her bullshit, I was just like, yes, they actually added this to the movie. I enjoyed that. So, Next category, Patrick, can we survive this horror film? Pretty self-explanatory, where we inject ourselves into the movie. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not a Marine. I'm not particularly come from a wealthy family. I guess I would hope I would be the smarter version of Peter because I'm 6'3". I'm a big dude, so maybe, but I'd hope I'm not quite as dim-witted as him. So I guess maybe I'd be the Peter character, and I don't know where you fit in. I guess maybe you were. I would say you're more like the, I hope you don't take offense to this, you're more like the Frank character where you're just like very matter-of-factly, like not up for people's bullshit.
Except for the fact that I wouldn't just make a random joke in the middle of the thing. But yeah, maybe I'm more Frank, or also like maybe a touch of, I think I'm more Rickles. I think I can kind of relate to Rickles with like a touch of Frank's irritation. You know what I mean? I'd be irritated like Frank, but more pragmatic like Rickles, I think is my thing. Also, part of me is very much Dean, with the Angus Cloud character, where it's like, I just kind of want to get high and fucking talk shit. Like, I kind of like that too. That's kind of more my favorite shit. But if shit's gonna hit the fan, I'm somewhere between Rickles and Frank. But Damon, we're going up against Abigail. It seems like only sunlight and stakes to the heart work. You got to get in awful close to make that happen. Yes, I've trained mixed martial arts. You have as well, but come on. We're facing a 200-year-old vampire. She's 200 years old for a reason. We're probably going to go either up in smoke, or we're going to lose our heads, or we're going to fucking, it's curtains for anybody who goes up against a vampire, as it should be.
Yeah, you put her in a rear naked choke, you're losing a fucking arm, is what I'm saying. So yeah,
right.
Yeah, so I'd like to think in this movie, like I would be the bigger muscle guy because I am 6'3", so I guess in a way I have to be Peter, but I 100% guarantee you I would be Dean Angus Cloud, because if Catherine Newton's around, I'm 100% going to be hitting on her. So yeah, like I'm going to be the guy, be like, hey, so you want to hook up after this? Like, you got any plans? Like, because Catherine Newton's not hard on the eyes, so yeah, I feel like I'd be a mix of those two characters. But guess what? Neither one of them make it out alive. So yeah,
no.
Dead, definitely dead. I don't know exactly what horrific way I'm going to die. Although I did think at one point Abigail snatching the crucifix off Peter's chest and just like little mini stabbing him for like 5 minutes was so brutal, because she's
like
got like the little tiny crucifix just like jabbing it with it. I was like, God damn, that looks painful.
I like that scene.
I'm not making it out alive. I don't know which horrific way I'm going to die, but I know I'm going to die.
Yeah, it doesn't even make sense that Melissa Barrera's character makes it out. It's like, what? Okay, Abigail's bloodthirsty and has reasons to kill all these people, and she just lets her walk because she was nice to her. Oh, okay. Yeah. Nobody really survives this family. I mean, even their own people. Lambert was part of their family. Even he doesn't survive. So I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, I know why they do it. I get it. Like, you gotta have
I get it.
But yeah, but again, like I said, I saw the trailer. They showed the trailer for the remake of Speak No Evil, which we'll of course review when it comes out in September. We reviewed that movie, and I'm not gonna ruin the movie and say like it's one of the most horrific endings, and I mean that in the best of ways. It is one of the most depressingly dour, just horrific endings of a horror film ever. I don't think I'm underselling. I'm definitely overselling that. It is absolutely one of the best, most horrific endings of a horror film ever. And my girlfriend never watched it with me, and so she saw the trailer for the new one, and she loves James McAvoy, and I'm like, that's the thing that's kind of getting me into the new one, is because I do love James McAvoy. He's a really good actor. And I was like, but I know it's not going to be unless they just totally redo the ending, which they may. The ending is I told her, I was like, this is one of the most horrific endings you'll ever see. She's like, what is it? I was like, I can't tell you. You can't know. So my point about the ending is it would have been worked a little bit more effectively if this was that, like, where it's just like nobody makes it out alive. You go up against a vampire, and eventually her fucking vampire father, you ain't making it out of there.
Yeah. I think something about that would have worked. I think it's just maybe Melissa Barrera was like The Rock. She's like, I'm not losing. I can't lose, or something. I have no idea, but it's just like, yeah, that would have been the icing on the cake if she didn't make it out.
Yeah, but again, like I said, I get why they do it. It's you got to have that moment. I understand why they do it. Last category is always, Patrick, is it scary? I know we already kind of answered this one, but we'll just answer it in more broader terms now. Is this film scary? No, it's not. But it's still a fun movie. I still enjoyed it. Listen, I know there's a lot of weird complaints in here when I talk about the trailers and I talk about the Dan Stevens twist at the end that I didn't like, and that's true. I didn't like that. That's my biggest criticisms of the film. But overall, I still really enjoyed this movie. Again, I loved the Angus Cloud character. I loved some of the funnier reactionary humor. Tons of gore. And again, if you are scared by gore, the gore works. There's lots of good tension. I like the performances. If I would have gone in blind, knowing nothing, I probably would have enjoyed this even more. But it's not traditionally scary, but I don't even know that they're trying to make it that kind of, like, when I think of Ready or Not, same thing. Like, I love Ready or Not, but I don't think it's really scary. It's a fun movie, fun horror movie. And there's nothing wrong with making a fun horror movie. This is a fun horror movie.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun horror movies. I mean, we haven't talked about it on the show, but we've talked about Shaun of the Dead a million different times. fun. That's fun. It's fun. It's fun with a touch of heart in it. You know, there's some heartfelt moments in that movie, but overall, that's just a fun comedy ride. You know, and I think a lot of people are going to say that about Abigail as well. It's not a scary movie. It's very gory, so you know you have that going. And if you're like anti-gore, which some people are, you're not gonna like this movie because it's covered in fucking blood and guts and gore and piles of bodies and ripped open necks and shit like that. There's horror elements in it, but I don't even think it's trying to be scary. I mean, we had trouble even picking a best scare this time around because it didn't even take place in the parts of the movie that are supposed to be scary. So how about that? It's not a scary movie. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be a fun horror movie. And by all accounts, it is. Did I have as much fun with it? No, because I knew most of it coming in. I knew most of the movie. And then the parts that I didn't know came to me very obviously. So nothing got subverted. All the jokes, for the most part, were told. So, yeah, okay. This one, it was a miss for me. But I know most people, yourself included, are going to love it. And you know, once again, I'm going to be sitting by myself while everyone else goes on and on about how much they love Abigail.
But here's the thing, and I know you already said this earlier, but before we close out, I want to say this. Had they not fucked it up with the trailer and you just went in blind, you had not seen 18,000 times the trailer for this movie, which we both did. If you had gone in blind, you probably would have left this film leaving with a pretty positive perspective. Like a pretty like
more so, yes, but it is still a very predictable movie. So once that ball got rolling and I was like, "Oh, I didn't see that coming." Then I would start piecing everything together. They give you so many clues even in the early parts of the movie that don't take place like in the trailer. You're still like, I have most of the pieces. I think I know most of what's going to go on, but would I have enjoyed it more if the trailer had been cut differently? Absolutely. I think I would have. I think this would have been ticked up maybe a notch or two from where it is right now.
And that's what I'm getting at. Like, and I think I just want to get that out to the people because again, you said this earlier. I want to be clear about this. Some people say I don't give a shit. Like I like the trailers and I don't care that I know going in. I want to be clear about that. That's fine. That's totally cool.
Yeah.
And that's why I said like, if you had not, like, in your perspective, had you not seen the trailer and known everything, you would have enjoyed this more. Like, you actually, for the most part, I mean, I wouldn't say you loved this movie, but it was a fun horror movie. Like, that's what it's supposed to be. And it sounds like, for the most part, it was a fun horror movie. It just got ruined because of how much they gave away going into it, and you already knew going into it. And I get it. I felt a lot of the same way. I was able to ignore it more, and so I still enjoyed it more, but again, to your point, like you didn't hate this movie, you hated the way they spoiled the movie, and you know I think that's the larger point I want to make. Just so people know, you didn't hate this movie, you hated the way they promoted it.
I wouldn't say I liked this movie though. I don't want to mischaracterize it either. Like it is once it got into what I didn't know, I still didn't like it because it was too predictable. That was what I was more curious about with you was like, is Damon going to like this movie because it's a super, super predictable movie? Now, again, you and I, we watch so many movies that you better come with your A game if you're going to get past guys like me and Damon who see tons and tons of movies. This movie does not shirk your expectations any way, shape, or form. If you guess it, it's probably right. That's kind of my problem with this movie, aside from the trailer stuff. So I wouldn't say that I liked this movie. I would just say I would have liked it more had the trailers not completely ruined the part that I knew was coming for an hour.
And for me, I still really liked it because when I get into a movie like this that I know what it is and it's not trying to be more than it is, I can still sit down and enjoy it. Even though, again, I wish they had not put the trailer out there. I wish they had never revealed there was a vampire in this movie. And I wish that they had not done the twist at the end, making Dan Stevens the bad guy and turning Abigail kind of into a weird hero after everything, after all the atrocities she carried out so excellently, by the way. But outside of that, I still really enjoyed this movie because I knew the game plan. I knew this. I knew the game plan going in. This is a fun, kind of goofy, kind of gory horror film. I'm fine with that. I didn't need it to be more than what it was. I didn't need it to be Speak No Evil. I didn't need it to be When Evil Lurks. I didn't need it to be even Late Night with the Devil, where it was a little more nuanced. I didn't need any of that in this movie. I knew what this was going in. I knew the assignment. And so that's why I think I kind of enjoyed it more because, again, predictable. Sure, it was predictable, but I knew it was going to be predictable. I knew going in, even before the trailer fucked everything up, I knew going in, like I was like, they're not trying to be the usual suspects. They're not trying to be Seven with a head in the box at the end of the movie. They're not trying to be that. And I'm okay with that. And trust me, by the way, and you know this as well as I do, Patrick, a lot of films that try to do that fail badly when they try to be unpredictable. So there's a balancing act with horror.
There is certainly a balancing act. It's a well-produced movie, and I think most people are going to like it. And it seems that way. Like the early exit polls seem that people just love this movie. And like I said, most people don't care. Most people don't care that they know everything's coming. My wife sometimes will read an entire plot of a movie before she goes to watch it. Like some people just don't give a shit about that stuff. I need to be surprised.
Yeah, and that's fine. That's totally fine. That's why we give all perspectives on this show. All right, that is our episode for this week. We got a couple of weeks before anything new comes out, so we're going to get to some classics again. We're going to return to our Alien franchise review, which we haven't done for a while because we've had a slew of new movies. So we're going to get a couple classic episodes, then we get the ball rolling again and going into April and May because we have a lot of movies coming out in May. The new Strangers movie, there's a movie called Tarot coming out, and then a movie In a Violent Nature. Am I getting that title right?
In a Violent
Nature. That comes out at the end of May. A lot of buzz around that one. That's kind of like the next Late Night with the Devil, like the movie that everyone's buzzing about coming out of the festival circuit. So we're going to review that coming up in May. So I have a couple classic episodes coming up, and then we'll get back into some more new stuff. Abigail is in theaters right now. Highly recommend checking it out. Just because of nothing else, support horror in theaters. I love it for that.
Please.
As always, thank you for tuning in. Obviously, check us out on all your favorite podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. And, of course, please go over and subscribe on our YouTube channel. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead. You'll find us over there. It means a lot if you could subscribe to our YouTube. We're really trying to build up that viewership over there. If you want to just listen to it, you don't have to watch the video. You don't have to see us, but you can still listen to us over there. And if you want to see us, hey, we got, we're there too. We may be scarier than Abigail. You never know. If you got questions, comments, movies you'd like us to review, if you had a different thought on Abigail or the trailers for that matter, please send us an email, rotlivingdead@gmail.com. That's rotlivingdead@gmail.com. Or you can find us on all of our social media channels on Twitter/X. We are on Facebook and we are on Instagram. Just search Rewind of the Living Dead and you will find us over there. And you can also find us on our own personal social media channels. I am at Damon Martin and you are?
At Director Patrick.
And a big thank you, as always, for everyone that tunes in each and every week to the show. We'll be back next week with another edition of Rewind of the Living Dead. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you then.
Peace.